Hi.
Good, good, Dr. Brown. How are you?
Good. Sorry, I've been missing in action. It's been crazy.
We will not give you detention. You get a free hall pass.
Thank you.
Let's see, waiting for. Just waiting for Dr. Haushen. How are you, Dr. Fogarty? Wagner, Labarda, Brown, Quinn.
Jeff Feller's here. I'm on phone though. Unfortunately, I'm driving around.
Hi, Jeff. It's good to hear your voice. This is Maggie.
Hello.
We should get started shortly. We're just waiting for Dr. Haushen. Dr. Haushen, is that you? I see you, but I don't hear you. Dr. Haushen? There we go. Dr. Haushen?
I can't hear you, so just hold on.
Okay. I can hear you.
Great. Okay.
Okay, great. And just to confirm, can you see the agenda on the screen in front of you?
Yep.
I do.
Okay, all right, good. And I have the other materials. I should be able to click through whenever you're ready, depending on how fast the connection's working. But we can go ahead and call the meeting to order whenever you're ready. There's no need to approve any minutes or anything like that. So you can just go ahead and call the meeting to order whenever you'd like.
Okay, I'm calling the meeting to order. Hi, everybody. Hi. So I'm going to add in the chat here a kind of a list that we can go through and talking about these things, if that's okay with you all. I'm requesting permission from the host to do that.
Okay, I will do the best I can. Let me see.
I think I've already got permission.
Okay.
Okay, so for me, the purpose, you know, as the agenda said, the purpose was to talk about the results, indicators, and sources specifically for elementary and secondary age children. I just wanted to provide a time for us to discuss those things a little bit more in detail. And so that's the purpose. I'll leave that blank just for the interest of time. So what I was hoping to do first was to get an update from last Friday's meeting to find out if the current list spreadsheet that I have of indicators if the spreadsheet that I have is current and that we all have is current. So we're talking about it from the same document. And also to find out if Dr. Schneider's suggestion was adopted, which was to provide some base. We can talk a little bit more in detail about what her suggestion was. And then to talk real briefly about the rationale with regard to the indicators. You know, so there are positive indicators, negative indicators. As far as I see it, individual indicators versus system-wide or systemic. And we haven't really gotten into that conversation as we're talking about them so far, and that's really important for youth. And then to look more specifically at what indicators we might want to add to these results using a positive youth development framework, one for sure, and then two, making sure that we're addressing specific things like the criminal justice system. That was one that was a big question mark for me. So I'm glad you're on the call, Professor Quinn. And I thought we could just go through the sections, go through the results section by section and see what's possible to add, and then see if it's possible to task things out to specific people after this call to bring back to the next full technical advisory committee meeting. Is that acceptable, or any thoughts about that process?
So, Dr. Hodgson, it's May Quinn. So I have sent to Colin this morning a brief effort on my part to reconstruct the additional indicators I spent the time writing up and providing to the group. The last time we were all together, I handed in albeit in longhand form, old-timey, my own notes in the margins and at the end of a document, my observations relating to the indicators and things that I thought were missing from the perspective of a youth advocate who's worked in the court system. I noticed when I received back after that meeting the updated indicators list that none of my suggestions had made it to the list. So I raised last meeting that concern, and apparently my list was missing. And so an effort has been made since last meeting to locate the information I provided to the group, and it has been lost. You know, I have to say, I haven't contributed a lot. I feel like this process is really geared towards social scientists, and the vocabulary and methodologies are not those that I'm really familiar with. So really the only thing I felt like I could contribute was to say, hey, where in the world do I encounter young people, and where are some of the places these young people may be in terms of data that we're overlooking, where I'm encountering them, needs aren't being met, and there might be some further indicators. So it's really all I really feel like on a certain level I could contribute. So I contributed and it was lost. So I have, as I said, sent to Colin this morning a few off the top of my head efforts, but to be perfectly frank, I don't care to spend my efforts as a volunteer redoing my work. And I don't know which list we're working from at this point. You know what I mean? Like which indicator list I'm supposed to look at to then review it and submit additional information. So I'm with you. I think there are really a bunch of places where kids are in contact with the justice system outside of the juvenile justice system, the proper juvenile courts that we've created. And so that's what I try to lift up. And but I've done that in a cursory way, provided to Colin. And to be honest, after this meeting, I think will be stepping off of the advisory committee. I don't think it's particularly great use of my time, or my contributions don't really feel like either that helpful. And I can make some recommendations for local juvenile justice folks you might want to fold in going forward, but this will be my last meeting.
Got it. Thank you. Sorry to see you go, and hopefully we can recover that document. But while you're here today, Professor Quinn, I'd love to hear your input when we start talking about indicators with regard to kids encountering the juvenile justice, and we'll try to find what we can.
Got it.
So any other thoughts about the quick list I put on here as a process of going through the discussion?
Looks
Okay.
good.
Great. Okay, so I missed last Friday's meeting. Will someone let me know whether or not the list of indicators that I have in front of me, which is the last list I'm looking at, is in sections. It has the 5 results at the bottom, and it also has my feedback added to it, and there are no other changes that have been made. My feedback is just in red boxes. Is there something more current than that? Colin, you're muted.
Yeah, I'm unmuting myself there. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I believe that is the most current. Maya's on the phone, and Maya and Dr. Knopf are the keepers of the spreadsheet. They did pass out some additional information at the last meeting, but I believe what you have is the most up to date. Maya's on here. Maya, if I'm incorrect, let me know, but I believe what you have is the most up to date.
It's hard to tell. It's most likely, for the most part, up to date. There might be a few indicators that were added or taken off just by the data that we were able to find. But while you're going through, if you say an indicator that we weren't able to find, or there's some that we have found and you haven't included, I can let you know.
Maya,
Okay,
can you just go ahead and send me what you think is the most up to date, and I'll just put it on the screen?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for being on the call, Maya, and thanks for all the work you put in. Okay, sounds great. So I'm going to be referring to the list that I have as we go forward, and we'll figure it out. Okay, now Dr. Schneider gave some input around organizing this list and the indicators, the report back to the Children's Trust. And my question was that adopted? And, by was that adopted, her suggestion was that result indicators for which data is currently available under our organizational framework, which are the results. We should continue to track. And then generally, and then result indicators that the group thinks are important to include in the framework, but are not currently available, we should suggest, it sounds like, and then create, note that this should be baseline data that the trust is beginning to capture as part of the strengths and needs assessment. Those are the two that apply to this conversation. So my question is, did we decide to do that?
Dr. Housen, you can hear me, right?
Yep.
Okay. That was not discussed explicitly at the meeting. Everyone got a copy of those. But it was, speaking to Dr. Knopf after, he said the reason he didn't bring it up, one, was the interest of time, but that he intends to discuss that at the next meeting, and that will be the framework. His intention is to make that for the framework of the report, unless anyone has different ideas. So he and I discussed that in private and the appropriate time to bring that up, but it was his intent to incorporate those comments, if I remember correctly.
Great. Okay. I hope that vote passes, and I am definitely in agreement with what she's saying. The reason I'm bringing it up here is because I think that much of the
I'm sorry, Dr. Knopf is on the call. I'm sorry. He might want to just, I didn't realize he was here. He might want to, if there's something he wants to add, I just wanted to give him the opportunity. I'm sorry, Dr. Housen.
No worries.
Dr. Knopf, is that accurate, or? He might be muted. He can pipe in, but I'm sorry. But I think what I said was correct.
Okay. I mention it because it feels like much of what I hope we're about to do in the next 45 minutes is to create indicators for which there is not data currently available. So I wanted to make sure that that was okay. Largely our conversation has been around what data sources are available and what do they tell us. But I'm making an argument that we also that there's some other things we need to know that's not available. So I liked her framing of adding baseline data in, and wanted to make sure we were moving in that direction.
Yes.
Hey, I'm sorry, guys. I'm back now, I think. I don't know what's going on with my internet today.
Did you want to speak to whether or not the point that was made, Dr. Knopf, or did you miss it completely? If so, that's fine.
I think that we're talking about the suggestions that Dr. Snyder submitted.
Yes.
Correct. Yes, and I think I am I am incorporating her feedback into the first draft of the report that we will send out to the group for feedback. And my thought was, as Colin mentioned, that we were running short on time at the end of the last meeting, and didn't feel that we could have a full discussion about it. But I think that the suggestions that Dr. Snyder had shared were very much in line with the way that we've been talking about this from the beginning. And so it seemed most appropriate to incorporate that into a document that folks can react to, rather than just talking about it in the abstract, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, sounds good. All right, so I'm gonna launch in here to this thing that I called the rationale. And this may be, I'm gonna put it as non-social scientists as possible. I thought that might be helpful. So what we're trying to do with this work is say, these are the things that kids should have. You know, these are the skills, constructs, abilities, knowledges that kids should have. And those are the results. These 5 buckets of results on the spreadsheet. If you're able, Colin, will you pull up that spreadsheet at this time? And we're gonna just kind of stay on that for a little while. Or I'm happy to share my screen. So we've got these big buckets called results. And then we've got these things called indicators, and then we have data sources. And the way that I think about an indicator is it's a benchmark of a result, right? So if the result is kids are safe, kids are able to be safe in their neighborhood, which isn't necessarily one of our results. A benchmark is a child reports that he can walk around without being attacked. That would be an actual indicator of that result. And then the question is, what's the data source that maps onto that indicator? When I take a look at the spreadsheet, much of the data, so even before I get to when I take a look at the spreadsheet, in my very simplistic thinking, indicators can be both positive. The way that I'm thinking about it is they can be positive and negative, and they can be individual and system-wide, right? So an example of a positive indicator would be the number of children attending school consistently. For all students have access to quality education. The example of a negative indicator would be suspensions or discipline or out in school suspension. Those are negative. That tells us something that is wrong, right? The reason that I call the meeting is that there's a framework which governs youth and youth work, youth development, called the Positive Youth Development Framework, which is really geared to those positive indicators. How can we make sure that youth are having these kinds of experiences to mitigate against their risks and to prevent them from having problems? And it felt as though not many of those indicators are woven into this, into our current landscape of our current spreadsheet. So given that Kate is a professor in positive youth development, I called the meeting to try to give us some time to add those kinds of indicators and data sources throughout the 5 results. That was my major objective. The minor objective was to make sure everything else gets added in as well. So I'm going to let anyone respond to that, particularly you, Kate, if you have any thoughts.
To add, the positive youth development approach does look at negative indicators as well as positive indicators, but essentially when it comes to the positive indicators, we want to see those increase over time, whereas the negative indicators, we want to see a decrease. So essentially, to have both sides of the coin is an important part of positive youth development. But if you're missing one or the other, that is problematic too. So I agree with balancing it out with more positive approaches and I think a viewpoint in terms of our indicators / outcomes for you.
Okay, great. So, now the hard work begins. So if we all agree with that and there's no other questions about, okay, what are the indicators? What's the goal? I want to just kind of jump into the spreadsheet and maybe some of those documents that I sent that have examples of PYD indicators in them, as well as any data sources, Kate, that you might be aware of that I'm not.
I did want to mention something that I'm not sure who is replacing Dr. Tomar at UF Dentistry, just out of curiosity. I'm sure there's someone else. He's now he, as of last week, started at University of Illinois, Chicago in an associate dean position. So I guess
Help me understand why
that
Dr. Okay, is that somebody who works around this as well?
No, it's more, well, actually I have a student right now who works with him on publications, but it's more about children's oral health.
Okay.
And clearly, I think Dr. Tomar had run a clinic out of Alachua County, especially for youth probably the ones with the who really are in need of dental care. So I'm not sure who's in his stead. I know there's multiple people, I think, running that dental
Okay.
clinic. So.
Got it. So I'm going to start with what Colin has on the screen. All children are born and remain healthy. And I suppose, Colin, you're able to, if people want to participate, they'll raise their hand in a way where you see it. You can monitor people's comments coming in if someone's trying to make it, because I can't tell.
Yes, I can. And you're free to just chime in as well. Things are just moving very slow is all, so just bear with me.
Okay. All right. So under all children are born healthy and remain healthy, the first thing that I wanted to go through, this is going to feel tedious, so I apologize, is the definition that we've created for that result. So child health begins with maternal health and perinatal status and continues through childhood to include physical activity and healthy. I can't see the rest of it if there's more text there. Can anyone else? Let me pull up the actual spreadsheet.
We only see up to throughout.
Yeah, Colin just clicked on it so we can see the whole at the top.
Okay.
Let me just forward this to everybody as well while you're talking, Dr. Hauschen.
Just
Okay.
make line 2, make that row 2 bigger, just draw it down and it'll probably show the whole thing.
Yeah. Okay. I now have it in front of me, the whole thing too. I'm happy to read it out if that's helpful. As he's doing that. What I have
You
in
can actually see it now. It's up on the formula bar.
Great. Okay, so some of this feels as though we're missing some of the definition with regard to adult children, elementary age children and adolescents. So it continues through childhood. I would make the suggestion to add and adolescence there to begin with, to include, thank you, to include physical activity, healthy weight, vaccinations, and diet. I wonder if psychological, well, the next sentence says it also includes being mentally healthy and being able to engage their environment in ways that support autonomy, a sense of well-being, and age-appropriate ability to self-regulate feelings and behavior. So the first question I'm asking is, those of you who have expertise or knowledge with child and youth development, are there aspects of that we're missing in that definition?
I would say develop and maintain healthy relationships in terms of decision making and such.
Don't we have that in a later subset though, being able to relate to the word? I mean, I can't remember what the wording is of the. So this really was, I think, focused more on on health and psychological illness or health. The relationship stuff and some of the others, I think, were captured further down in another set of indicators. I think this one was intended to be more narrowly physical health, but vaccines for sure I thought we had in adolescence, and activity and healthy weight. I thought those were part of what we wanted. I just don't know that we had any way of capturing that. I think it was in that pot of, do we have the data? Do we have a data point for it?
And coming from a child development perspective, or teaching a course and using a textbook in general, people tend to like the whole child, or the areas of child development, and some combine social and emotional together. So it's socio-emotional, physical, and cognitive, are the areas that we think of when children develop, that we want them to develop in healthy ways. But I don't think we need to get the textbook definition in here. I don't know if there's anything about cognitive health, but I think that comes more when we get to the school age.
Right. Yeah, so I do think that I'm enjoying the conversation. And yes, Naima, there's a whole section on relationships. Don't forget what you said. Let's make sure that's added there. It does feel as though this construct is particularly talking about physical and psychological health. I'm not an expert in this area, so I'm wondering if mentally healthy captures the same language, the same meaning as psychological health, or and I do feel that cognitive should be added to whichever one is learned to be successful or has to do with education specifically. And we should remember this language about socio-emotional to make sure that it's in whichever one,
Well,
whichever.
I actually feel
one's on-
socio-emotional fits is covered in here.
Okay,
Engaging the environment, being mentally healthy, and also the self-regulating of feelings and behaviors. Clearly that.
The challenge is, how do you capture that data? Because right now there is nothing happening in the school system to capture it. Most outcome measures related to behavioral health, which includes mental health, substance use disorder stuff, is all proxy data, because there's no blood test and you're not out there administering a battery of psychological tests to kids, right? So the challenge becomes, how do you measure that? We did talk about including something, and I think we ended up not, about referrals for behavioral health treatment of some sort, and that does have a potential capture point, at least within the public school system, because they're now required to report that as part of the stuff that came out of the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Act. But you're not going to capture that then for kids that are in pre-K and VPK necessarily, unless they're involved with the social emotional development grant or early learning kind of child care. And you're not going to capture it for private school, homeschool.
okay. So let me understand where we are. I'm just writing what you said down. Challenge to capture. Are you saying it's a challenge to capture which thing? Mental health? I understand a lot of challenges to capture a lot of different things, but I'm hoping I have some indicators here in front of me that can go. So to capture mental health or to capture socio-emotional
Well, it's all part of the
constructs?
package. I mean, when you're talking about itty bitties, the pre-K kids, really you are talking about social emotional development. It's really about the capacity to self-regulate, right? When you get to the older kids, then you do start to track mental illness issues, it's like actual bona fide diagnostic kinds of things. But the only thing you're going to be able to capture with is this referral for treatment out of the school system, because they're required to keep it. You're not going to have good data. The majority of EPSDT screenings, for example, that happen through childhood for kids that have Medicaid are woefully inadequate when it comes to anything related to psychological health.
Okay.
They capture nice things like, are they talking on time, walking on time, those kinds of things. But self-regulation, I mean, so much of that is parental description. And I mean, there's a reason that to be diagnosed ADHD, it has to be in 2 settings, because oftentimes what one person finds disturbing in child's behavior, another person doesn't. So if they're not being difficult in school and at home, you can't make the diagnosis. And the kids aren't being tested or even screened on any universal basis. So anything you have is proxy at best.
Got it. So I'm looking in front of me at all the documents that I sent you all to see if there is an indicator. So there are a number of indicators out of the positive youth development framework that are related to socio-emotional health or self-efficacy or self-regulation. And some of these could be captured as baseline data in our needs assessment, right? We could ask questions. Some of these are captured in youth tools that are already out there, like the SAOY or the DESA, which I just became acquainted with. So I would like to add the indicator and then go back and consider what tools map onto them, because I know that they're there, at least for children 10 and up. I don't know about
Yeah,
kids under.
10 and up is an easier, I mean, I know when all of the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas stuff first came out and there was all of this discussion, we looked at a number of those kinds of measures in order to make sure that when kids were being screened, there was really some consistency. And we even talked about, could we get it so that we had a consensus about which instruments to use. So for example, UF Health and Meridian both agreed that we were going to use the same depression screening instrument so that we could stratify risk and do some things, but that there could be some consistency across systems, since we were the largest two behavioral health providers in the community. So I think it would be great. Again, I think what you're going to be up against is how do you sample and who are you going to capture the data on, and how universally are you going to be able to capture it? Are you going to be able to do it in private schools? Are you going to be able to do it with kids that are homeschooled? How do you get a representative cross-section actually taking the survey or getting the data? Colin, you had mentioned that in Jacksonville, there was some use of one of these instruments. How was that done there?
Well, we didn't use it quite the way Dr. Haushen suggested. You certainly could do that. We didn't use the SEO. She mentioned the SEO. We also considered the DESA, and there's a mini DESA, which is just, basically like it sounds, a lot shorter. But we used them more as to be able to track kind of pre and post effects of specific programs. So we didn't use it to try to get any population level snapshot of kind of where kids were at. You could do that. That's just not how we did it.
Okay. So I hear the question about how are we going to do it. I've been kind of looking at this now for a good little while, looking into this, and it seems like there are ways possible to do it, that the Children's Trust could administer it community-wide, one of these data collection sources. So I'm just gonna, if it's okay, stay in the realm of possibilities and add the indicators, and then we'll see, if y'all don't want to do it, that's cool, but at least we know it's out there and it's possible. So
That's why we have that category, the wish list bucket.
For sure, for sure. So I'm looking at a document that I sent out. It's called Positive Youth Development Illustrative Indicators. No one has to go to this document unless you really want to. I'm going to read from it. And I would suggest we add an indicator for self-control. So the way that this document is written, illustrators are, they're measures of whether or not something has changed or happened, right? So I'm looking at the first one and it says increased self-control at the conclusion of the training or program. Or a baseline indicator could be, does a child have the ability to delay gratification, control impulses, direct and focus attention, manage emotions, or regulate one's own behavior? I think the question that I'm asking right now is, how would we word an indicator around self-control or self-regulation to add, so we have something there to capture for that part of the construct?
I mean, it's an age-appropriate skill. I mean, you're talking, does the child have age-appropriate ability to regulate their behavior and emotion?
Yeah, that works for me.
Now, the question is, sorry, I need to backtrack a little. So ultimately with this document, it shows what we currently have available data-wise in Alachua County or maybe the state, but it also is a wish list of data that we would like collected. Is that
Yeah, there's both, there's data, there's indicators in both of those categories. We have the data, we don't have the data, but we want it.
Okay.
And we, I think, had an intermediate one of we have some data, but it's not the best. Don't we? Didn't we have something like that, Colin?
Mhm.
And yeah.
Yeah, there should be some kind of data development agenda at some point that comes out of this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Colin,
So it's not, I'm not in the schools, but this is not something that's on progress reports and report cards
No,
about,
ma'am.
wow, okay. It was on mine.
Yeah, but it was
There's no
usually like
doubt.
a narrative. Yeah, you used to, back in the day, we got a academic grade and a conduct grade
Colin,
Yeah,
and an
no.
expert grade, if I'm not mistaken.
Colin, this is Maya. If you want to scroll down in the document, at the end of it, there's something called the data agenda, and there's a few indicators there that might, they sound similar to what you're talking about, but we might want to change a little bit.
Okay.
So I saw that, Maya, and didn't understand what the data agenda is. Could you please explain that briefly?
Yeah, that's kind of what Maggie was talking about, like the wish list of data we don't currently have but want to have. So if we want to figure out how exactly we want that measured, that might be a good idea to clarify it.
Okay. So my next question is, who's taken notes? Who would be the one person who is now capturing all this new information on the spreadsheet? So it goes back to the next advisory council meeting.
Well, the meeting's being recorded for one, so just to make sure we don't miss anything, that'll take care of one gap. Herman's group is the keeper of the spreadsheet. So after this meeting, we can circle back and make sure that all of this is recorded and then put on there for the next meeting to discuss.
Oh, that's great. Okay. I'm happy to take some notes as well and send you what I capture while it's going. Okay. So
Say one thing there, Dr. Houchin. So just so it's clear, I received, I guess what it's supposed to be the same thing we're looking at right here. And, so I pulled up the document, the Excel spreadsheet that was forwarded to me so I could scroll at my, my own pace and check things out. I don't see the data agenda at the end of the document I have. Maybe I'm looking at the wrong place or the wrong thing. So to the extent your comment is suggesting that maybe there are different documents floating around and, as a process person, that's part of what I find like kind of troubling about all of this. When I hear like someone outside is privately maintaining all these documents relating to what's supposed to be a public entity doing work, it makes me a little weirded out. But anyway, the point is I'm looking at this Excel spreadsheet that has the five different pages, indicators, and I'm not seeing this same kind of wish list data agenda at the end of the document I was just sent.
So that one, there's two, I think I sent Colin two versions of indicator data. So one of them only has 2 buckets currently because that's where we're putting all the data. So you might be in the other one that has all the indicators we've spoken about, but it's not organized in terms of a data agenda.
There should be there's 2 attachments to your email, at least there should have been.
All right, well, I'll open the other one and see. I assumed it was the same item. I'll open and see if there.
And I have all of these. I'm really sorry about your paper that I don't have, but I have all of these documents that we're discussing, and they're available to the public at any time. And but yes, the Zucker Center is acting, I would say, as a consultant, free of charge, but as a consultant.
okay, so we have these. So we've got one spreadsheet that already has data agenda created for 2 of the results. And we have another spreadsheet that is just the straight up indicators with no data agenda. It feels like what we want to do is to continue to work with start with the ones that have data agenda, and then very quickly add a section that's data agenda for the other 3 if we get there in the next 20 minutes, which we're not. and go from there. Go from there. Does that sound good to everybody?
Yeah, so there's actually, so the data agenda is in the other spreadsheet with the 5 buckets. It's just not specified under a new heading called data agenda. It's if you look at the data that has the question marks in terms of source.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. All right. So I'm assuming then all my comments, all the indicators I suggested got added to the data agenda in this new revised document, because none of mine had sources. Okay, so let's start again, or not start again, but pick up on the results of physical health and psychological health. And we're looking at this data agenda to see if the indicators I just mentioned or any other that people have are already captured, and if there is a numerical benchmark we want to capture with them. So number of children able to regulate emotional and behavior at an age-appropriate level. Is that essentially what we just said? Was there any difference between that and what we just said?
That works.
Yeah. Number of children referred for mental health, pre-K, soothe, healthy weight, children. Okay, so can we add something here about percent of children involved in physical activity during out of school time?
Yes.
Okay.
We can add it, but I'm trying to be somewhat realistic and understanding too that you can only have so many key measures before people kind of wig out and don't pay attention. And that's a measure that I frankly don't know how, other than self-report, and if maybe it's included in these youth surveys, and then if so, again,
Yeah,
it'll be
but only older youth.
Yeah, and it's self-report. I mean, how
Yeah.
reliable is that? Is it, I got up and got a new bag of potato chips active, or, you know?
Okay, so here's what I'm thinking about. We have already, 100 plus out of school time programs who are providing physical activity to youth as part of their programming. If we're not including this, some measure related to this in the needs assessment, how are we structuring the continued monitoring, progress monitoring of those kids in those programs with regard to this construct? It might not be that we're able to get super accurate community level data for this, but we certainly can monitor effectively the kids who are using Children's Trust dollars in youth programming. Maggie, you're on mute.
Yeah, I know. I just realized. Yeah, we can capture it again. And I think maybe what that highlights is which of these indicators do we want to track as a population measure for the whole community versus as something that we can say is happening as a result of a program that we are funding. Because yes, if you're talking about one of the things that we believe is critical is activities of that type, maybe we can get some data on the number of kids that are participating countywide in organized activities. But I think that measure would be easy to capture as some kind of a programmatic measure rather than a population community-wide measure.
So here's my thinking, that it's important to have some kind of baseline data community-wide on that, even if it's through qualitative interviews, so we can so the trust is then making recommendations about whether or not this is an actual need of the community. Do we need more physical activity for youth or not? So I hear that we might not, as a qualitative scientist, I'm thinking that we can get some kind of answer that's reflective of a community truth around that, and then continue to measure more strategically the youth that are involved in programming around that. But I defer to Colin. This is your world.
Well, I did a needs assessment in Jacksonville when I was there, but it was a very specific needs assessment about out of school time. And one of the main questions of the needs assessment was how many kids are involved, what are, basically the question is, what are kids doing at out of school time? And so we obviously had similar arguments on what does that mean? I mean, were we just counting structured aftercare programs? Were we counting band and sports and all of that? So I think what would be helpful to me, this gets down to the story behind the story type data. So if we have indicators of, I think when we get to talk about neighborhoods and communities and safety and learning, and we find out that we're not getting the results there that we want to get, then one of the questions is, well, why not? And how are kids spending their time? And one of the questions we would ask is, well, what are they doing after school? When they're not in school, what is the time that they have? So it's not the kind of population indicator. To me, when I think of population level indicators, I'm thinking of very broad things that are easy for someone to comprehend on why that's good or bad. An infant mortality rate, disparities in specific educational outcomes. And then when we see those and we start to say, well, why? What is the reason? Then you get into things where, well, how are kids spending their time after school and in the summer? And that's when that's when the type of information that you've asked for, would be very, very helpful. So, I mean, we can, if the trust wanted to get that information, I agree with Dr. Houchen, it can be gotten. It's just a matter of defining and operationalizing it. And there's plenty of ways to get it. The district keeps track of who's in their aftercare programs. We did survey all the after school programs where I came from, whether we funded them or not, and got enrollment data. And it's very easy to figure out, if you count band and, the karate schools and all that. So it can be gotten. It's just at what level does it, tell the story or inform the trust to help make decisions ultimately on what they want to fund. So I'm not sure if that was helpful. It's kind of an equivocating answer. It's yes, it's important, but maybe not as a primary indicator of how is our community doing. It's more of one of those story behind the story data points is how I look at it.
And I think my fear as we have evolved this document is that we're going to be drowning in data. And how do you then make that informative? And how do you make that useful in a priority setting process?
Well, I think, my opinion, and to Dr. Houchen's point, is if the trust decides that out of school time is a priority, then that data is very helpful because that will tell you who. So maybe, as I'm thinking out loud, maybe that is a data point to be gathered by the consultant who will ultimately gather additional data for the needs assessment. And maybe that's where it would be important. If we decide out of school time's a priority, then when and where do we need programs and what are the kids doing already and where are the gaps?
That's exactly what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
And that's why I want to get it on the data agenda.
Yeah. Okay.
I feel like I want to move on past health. That was the only, other physical activity, available to youth during out of school time would be the only suggestion I add to this data agenda. Does anyone else have any?
What about sexually transmitted diseases? I know that birth to women under 15 is a part of it, but sexually transmitted diseases certainly tells us.
I think that's great. Is that captured anywhere else, Maya?
I don't think so, but I can see if we have that data available already, and if not, I'll add it to the agenda.
Okay, great.
I'm looking up here.
Your thought about sexually transmitted diseases just made me go to the how many do we have insured versus uninsured? Are we assuming that all children are insured?
Dr. Labarta, can you refresh my memory? Didn't we discuss this, and
I
was
think
it better vaccines, and we found that Alachua County was better than most places? Refresh my memory. Maybe that.
yeah, we did. We looked at that data, and I think, well, Florida had it, so Jeff may want to chime in. But I think we did look, and the percentages were really, really high of vaccinated kids. I do think insured, uninsured, we should be able to access, and it is really important information.
Yeah. So can we add that as well?
But I thought we had it.
It's on there.
Okay, great. Great.
Yeah. On the STD front, I can't say for certain, but I feel like that may have been something I previously flagged. It's something working in the juvenile justice setting. All kids I worked with previously who were arrested were automatically tested. Now, as a youth advocate, I had some issues with that and issues with consent and this and that. But there should be data. I imagine you'll find data out there for that that's pretty robust. I'm also just going to go on ahead and tape to the chat some of the off the top of my head things that I had sent to Colin. One of them may relate to this category we're on now, and that's teen fathers. I don't know quite how to put it, but when I read this, the first one I saw, I kind of like the overemphasis on the mother as the vessel for the child and how that impacts the child's health. I mean, obviously it's fundamental, but I somehow maybe thinking about teen fathers, their needs and their impact on younger kids might be something to add in here too. So I'll send that along.
Thank you. Can we move on to the next one?
Yes.
Great.
I do see a point though by May in the chat. Is that still there?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Which point are you talking about, Kate?
I thought it just came up recently, but I'm not seeing it now.
She has.
Oh, okay, yeah, LGBT, it starts with, you know, LGBTQIA, youth homelessness, other needs associated with sexuality, gender, identity, youth stopped by the police.
Yeah.
I'm having a little trouble scrolling. I think it's my.
I see it too. I looked at it really briefly, and I think that they all go on a different result, except potentially teen father. And I can't articulate an indicator around teen fathers right now that might go unhealthy. So I was still moving on.
Okay.
For sure. I'm just throwing this up here because in case we wrap up at 3, and I wanted everything I sent to Colin to get to the whole group. That's all. Sorry.
Yeah. May I ask for us to wrap up at 3:30? Is that okay with everyone?
Yes.
Yeah.
Rock on. Okay. So learning, will you, I'm going to refer to the spreadsheet that I have, the physical copy I have, and maybe if you take us down to the data agenda, we can start there and make sure that we're not adding things that already have been thought about.
I am scrolling. It just takes a minute.
No problem.
It's very frustrating.
Welcome to the slowness of everyone using the internet at once on the planet.
Yeah.
Would it help if I turned off my video or anything
No,
like that?
no, I don't think so. I think the whole world would have to turn off their videos. I'm sorry.
No worries. All right, so while you're going down to the data agenda, let's review the construct and make sure that we like that, the language about that with regard to a child and youth development framework. So Colin can stay at the bottom. I'll scroll mine all the way back up to the top, and it says, all children need to have a secure relationship with a caregiver who provides support, guidance, and stability as a foundation for how they go out into the world and develop other healthy relationships. I like that, personally. I'm cool with that. Anybody have comments or thoughts about it from your discipline?
Sorry, I just had to open up the document to look at it, so.
No worries.
This is Sherry Kitchens with the Child Advocacy Center. I really like it, and I like the language also. The only thing that might be challenging is how to measure that, just like some of the other social and emotional development issues we've already talked about. That, you know, my perspective on if this caregiver is supportive and available might be different than someone else's. So there might be some importance in whatever measure we use, or whatever, I guess, vessel we use, has some kind of really explicit description of what that, you know, appropriate, available, nurturing caregiver looks like.
That's great. I think that's what we're wrestling with the indicators. Okay, so the data agenda has social measure for elementary, middle, and high school children. I'm not sure I know what that means. Then we've got things about science here, which I'm not sure why that's related. Oh, this bottom says learning, and we're on supportive caregivers and relationships. So we're on different pages. There is not a sheet yet on all children have nurturing, supportive caregiver and relationships with a data agenda. That's what I'm assuming that means. Yes, Maya?
Yes, correct. But you should, let me pull it up, but there should still be, like I was saying with the question marks.
I see it. I've got that on the chart.
Yeah.
Okay, so what we're looking at, Colin, isn't going to help us here. I suggest we just continue with nurturing, supportive caregiver and relationships, and I'm going to just name, given the question marks on the sheet, what it sounds like are going to be the data agenda for the section. So I'll name those first, and maybe if anyone catches them, they can put them in the chat. And then the question is, are there any things we want to add from PYD or other frameworks that are not here?
Dr. Houchin, for
Yes.
this bucket, it might be best to use the documents that Patty sent around, because if I'm remembering correctly, I don't think this, we're mostly going off of the data that she was able to collect. So this one might not be updated since the last meeting on Friday.
All right, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to skip this one then, because I don't have Patty's documents in front of me.
Yeah, you should. They went out with all of the agenda material, and then as a subsequent one that Colin sent out. It was all the graphs that come off of the DCF website.
No doubt. I'm sure I have it, but I don't have it at my disposal, and Colin would then need to circulate it to everybody to make sure we all have it. So in the interest of time, I'd suggest.
We did, Deidre, talk about that at length Friday.
Okay.
The time before. So I think we've gone through those. I think it's just a matter of getting them incorporated into the chart, including some suggestions about that came from me and from Sherry and from some others that we could that they thought they could pull.
Okay. So all I'll say about. Can I finish my thought, Naeem, and then I'll hand you the mic. What I'll say is that in the Excel spreadsheet that I circulated to Colin about 2 weeks ago, I named a number of indicators for that in the same way I'm saying we should capture these indicators at least in the baseline that the Children's Trust does community-wide, that I think should be included, that are situated in the PYD framework, or just a positive indicator of interactions. So I hope that those are being captured in this new data agenda. Naima?
I agree with you, Dr. Houchin. My only concern in the wording is the cultural differences that might come up of what we mean by nurturing or supportive and what others mean. Hey, I go to work every day, I provide for you, I do all these things. What do you mean I'm not? So I think that we really got to keep in mind there are cultural differences of how people express support and nurturing. What is that? From a middle class America, it means one thing, but it may mean something else to different groups.
I totally agree with you.
Yeah, 100%. I'm so glad you brought that up.
So, so how about if we added a second sentence that said, secure relationships are culturally situated, and period. I mean, that's all I would add for that framework there. And then as we talk about the indicators, that allows us to then capture in the indicators and in the strength and needs assessment what that means and what the different cultures are being represented in our community.
Right, because we have measures, you know, attachment, security, so to speak. And I honestly will say that they vary by culture. So I'll give you an example. Germany apparently has more dominantly an insecure type of attachment between mother and child using, you know, Mary Ainsworth's strange situation to measure that. Now, we're not doing that, obviously, in Alachua County, but that does vary, clearly vary culturally, as well as parenting practices. And I think the academic community is finally acknowledging the issue of attachment as well as parenting in terms of understanding cultural differences and not just using a Eurocentric model to say, oh, this is what ideal parenting is, and this is what secure attachment is.
Got it. So we'll have, we're in agreement that we'll add that sentence, that secure relationships with the caregiver is culturally situated. And Naima, I really appreciate you bringing that up, because there should be some nod to kinship communities for some cultures, because there is not necessarily a caregiver. There are a community of caregivers who share responsibility for a young person. And
yeah,
then,
that's why the parenthetical S, we recognize that for some kids, it could be an extended family, a kinship group. It was not intended to be a single parent necessarily, or a, you know, two-parent, mommy, daddy kind of household.
got it. Okay. All right. So how about we just take a second? Are there any other thoughts about the relationships and caregiver one? I've made, you know, I noted that I made a number of comments, and I expect to see that on the data agenda. But are there others that you're thinking about? And I'm now looking also at Professor Quinn's list to see if there's something in there specifically that needs to be added to this result.
Yeah, I mean, the last time we were all together, I used the term kinship care. Now, I don't remember if I wrote more about that in the document I produced. And as I think about things, I don't know, it is possible, Deirdre, that maybe you have the document. There was some, at the end of the meeting, some paper shuffling. And so maybe Colin passed that on to you mistakenly, or, you know, it was intended to be passed on you. So maybe as you go through stuff, you might find my list, and it may say a few words, you know, more about kinship care. I don't know.
Okay, I'll check. I don't think so, but I'll check. Okay, so okay, so is there anything? I'm looking at all the additions you made, Professor Quinn, and I'm wondering, is there some, you know, measure around percent of youth who've had a negative encounter with the criminal justice system that might help us get a better idea of who has secure relationships and has the ability to develop other healthy relationships? I'm just throwing it out there because it's real.
Yeah, for sure. No, one of the things I raised, and I've just briefly listed here, is, there's data out there. Most jurisdictions collect data on just stops. The notion that, encountering a kid on the street, obviously in this community in particular, primarily kids of color, that is not disruptive to the child's well-being, not undermining of the child feeling, supported by adults in the world. I mean, all those things are very real, as you say. And, just the data point, I think I would be surprised if local police departments aren't collecting that data. Now, whether they're doing it for their own purposes or it's a federal requirement, I couldn't tell you. But working with the Ferguson Commission, we were able, as I recollect, to get our hands on just these walk and talks and Terry stops, even if it's, because there's so much focus on, were you arrested? Were you prosecuted? Like that's the least of anyone's worries on a certain level. Like it's the day-to-day injustices of just being stopped, thrown up against a car, blah, blah, blah. But, as I say, a lot of jurisdictions collect that data. And if Alachua doesn't, I'd be surprised. And maybe if not, then something to request.
Okay. Would you suggest, that sounds like it's exactly what I'm trying to get at. Should that go here or should that go on some other construct like safety or what have you?
I would almost say it belongs either in connecting to the community or safety. I mean, I think on the negative side, they may be safety, right? Are there safe encounters between kids and law enforcement? Which might be a more positive way to spin that as well, because there are some things going on in this community that are very positive between law enforcement and Reichert House, which is run through GPD, for example, has had a huge positive impact on a lot of kids. So I think that there may be a way of phrasing that both ways. Are there dangerous encounters or encounters that don't result in an arrest but are nonetheless questionable or potentially risky? And then are there positive interactions between youth and law enforcement as a connection?
Well, what I'm hearing May say is that a stop by police, a walk and talk, what is known as a Terry stop, which I had a parent call me about this 3 days ago, is a negative, is by definition negative to a child's mental health, has a negative impact. So that is a particular indicator we want to capture, where there is something else you're suggesting about positive interactions as well. Yeah. So I'm hearing that we want to put those on another sheet, and we'll hold those for now. Anything else for this particular sheet about relationships and caregivers? So, yeah, I hope that I captured all the stuff in PYD around bonding in my notes. I felt like there was a lot of information there in the PYD framework. So Kate, any thoughts? Did you have any additional ones?
No, let me make sure I have the document in front of me. Well, okay, now I'm trying to think about, are we looking at relationships and caregivers still, or connect, contribute to community? Okay.
Relationships and caregivers.
Okay.
And my additions are in red boxes. If you have that.
I don't have that one. Okay. So that's
but
I remember seeing it in one of our meetings, but I didn't have access to it.
Okay.
Okay, so I have nothing to say. Sorry.
All right, we'll move on and just hope it's all there. So connect and contribute to community. Will you move us to that one, Colin? And thanks everybody for your patience and participation. You know, I would add access to out of school time to available out of school time.
That's measured in the Florida Youth Substance Abuse Survey, so that's accessible, I think, at middle and high school.
Great, access to out of school time programs.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Okay.
it's more about after school quote activities. So it's because they're taking the surveys in schools. So.
Okay. Will you add that data source, Maya?
Kate, do you know whether, is that survey just in the public schools?
Yeah, public and charter schools. It's not offered elsewhere. It's the typical, you know, the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, the Florida Youth Tobacco Survey, and the Florida Youth Substance Abuse Survey are those three surveys that are, they give them all three in the classroom together. And, you know, so certain kids get certain surveys and et cetera. And the statewide is being collected this year.
One of the efforts we could
county.
make as part of the trust community engagement effort is to maybe work with some of those private schools to see if we couldn't get some of them to participate in some of that data collection.
Yeah. So if you'll add that data source, Maya, to available out of school time / let's make it after school activities, and then make the note that that's only administered to public school students right now. And maybe we can add on the data agenda for this page, talking with all school children, all school administrators to administer that particular tool.
Dr. Haushen?
Yes.
Someone has their hand up. Miss Chisholm, I believe, has their hand up.
Hi. Go ahead, Miss
Hi.
Eller.
Hi, everybody. I heard Racket House mention a little while ago, and I just want to make sure we're aware of the great work that Systems of Care with the police department is doing in the number of reductions that they've had in juvenile arrest. So that might be another source if you're interested. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we now got a data agenda for administering the tool, that particular tool to all countywide to school children. We've got available out of school time added to access to out of school time and after school activities. It certainly feels as though I'm wondering if May's suggestions about youth stops go here, or if they go, I'm going to suggest that they go in all children live in a safe community.
I'd agree with that.
Okay.
That's fine.
So the other indicators that I would suggest for connected and contributing to community are, give me 1 second, and I'm going to, there's one here that says youth help to develop participation roles and have opportunities for leadership roles in the community. So I'd suggest that.
Yeah.
And youth have agency and ability to build new skills. Any others for this on connecting and contributing to the community? All right, what we did not do is look at the definition of the result briefly to make sure we all are good with that. So it says students with meaningful activities are safer and more likely to succeed in school if the activities provided are enriching, active, and team building environment. The only addition I would make there is the word civic. So we're not just focusing on out of school time participation. We're also calling the county and city governments to think about civic participation for youth. That's part of the PYD framework as well, or to some extent part of it. So I wonder if that can't read students with meaningful activities and opportunities for civic participation. Everybody okay with that?
Sure.
Great. Okay. If so, let's move on to safe community.
Okay, just put up a nice, so that's part of what we can get from the youth survey.
Great. Great, great. Wonderful. Okay, so for safe communities, once again, I believe I added a whole bunch of indicators to this that I'm assuming is going to get added to the data agenda. Let me make sure. I can't find that right now, so I'll just move on. So, but let's add and word May's contributions here. So it sounds like we're adding one that says number or percent of youth stopped by police. You know, and then whatever the abbreviation is, for example, Terry stops, walk-in talks, in parentheses, period. That's one. Should we be adding number or percent, number of youth in jail and number of youth in prison to this as well?
Yeah, so Deirdre, just in case it's not clear, that when folks are talking about, you know, kids involved in the juvenile justice system, that overlooks, you know, wide swaths of kids, particularly in Florida, who come directly into the adult system or who maybe started in the juvenile justice system but now landed in the adult system. So I think trying to capture the data for those kids separately is important. Florida has the largest number of kids who are direct filed into the adult system of any state, and the age can be quite low, you know, 13 years old, that kind of thing. And so I think it's important to get that data. And it did occur to me after I sent this, a related bit of data is kids on adult probation. So outside the juvenile court system, outside the, you know, kiddie court, you've got kids walking around 15 years old on adult probation. It has massive impacts. It can, and I'm terrible. I'm sorry I didn't make a copy before I handed it over. I just thought like it was better to just hand it over. But I don't know the answer to this question, but that could also impact voting rights in this state. It does in many other states. So if a kiddo is treated as an adult for prosecution purposes and only lands on probation, it's possible it has, you know, these other ancillary impacts around their engagement as a citizen. So I think, you know, kids in jail, adult jails, kids in adult prisons, and kids on adult probation, getting that data.
Okay, thank you. That's
In
great.
the conviction, May, do we not want just the number of kids that are for direct filing, the data on direct filing?
Sure, you can so you can get the direct files. It doesn't show the disposition necessarily.
Right, but if those are different, so a direct file that ends up not being prosecuted to the full, doesn't end up going all the way through the process, or that ends up in an acquittal rather than a conviction. It just seems if there's a disparity, if the numbers are the same, then it's irrelevant. But if there's a gap, at least it tells us that a bunch of kids are being treated that way from the get-go.
Yeah, so your point is well taken. In St. Louis County, one of the data points we collected, my clinic, around events in Ferguson related to kids who are being not direct filed, but certified. So, start in juvenile court, there's a certification or waiver hearing or transfer, it's called, all three. Kid gets sent then to adult court after this hearing. In some instances, I'm trying to remember the years, but up to 50% of those cases went away. They were dismissed because once it hit adult court, the adult prosecutors thought that this child's case was junk. So maybe that's a positive, but you just had a kid who was sitting in detention for months, treated as an adult, stigmatized, thrown out of the school system, blah. So I don't know how you want to slice and dice it, but I just want to be sure that you're not focusing singularly on the juvenile court system. You have to focus on kids that are going into the adult system and figuring out their dispositions. What's the outcome of those cases, because that could tell you a lot about their needs and what's happening to them.
Great. Professor Quinn, do you have any, I'm curious about commitment programs and what your thoughts are on those. Because I'm thinking about Gator Teen Child, and their whole goal is in court to make sure to even keep kids out of commitment programs.
Yeah. So what do you mean by commitment programs? You mean post-dispositional outcomes in juvenile court?
Yeah, I'm thinking of what Stacy Steinberg had kind of shared in a lecture. It was one of her main things, that if she could keep the kids out of these programs, then it was in the best interest of the child. And it's usually what the child wanted themselves, because that's kind of the...
So let me say a couple of things about that. Okay, you got the adult court kids, you got juvenile court kids. I haven't practiced in your juvenile court here, but let me say, Gator Teen Child, and as much as I love Stacy and she's a good and great colleague, they're not representing kids in juvenile court against charges anymore. There's been a massive shift in that program's focus. And when Michonne Rawls was in it, who's now a judge, they did both abuse and neglect matters and delinquency cases. Yeah. And for reasons I totally understand. I mean, I've got great respect for Stacy. Her background's child welfare. My background is JJ and defending. So I'm glad that that's their focus. I'd be surprised if they're working with more than 5 kids a year at this point to try to keep them out of the system in that respect. But yeah, she's right. And so I don't know how you drill down. One of the things we encountered in St. Louis County was this. So they would create a program in the juvenile court to say, oh, let us create a diversion at the time of probable cause hearing, that keeps the kids out of detention. Well, the problem is that, the kid probably shouldn't have been arrested in the first place. The kid doesn't want to be in that diversionary program because there are restraints on that child's liberty and on the family that are hugely problematic with not a lot of benefits to the family. And so, yeah, these things get lost. And so Annie E. Casey came in and said, oh, great, we've set up this, great diversionary program. And we drilled down into it and learned these kids were tripping up. They'd have ankle bracelets stuck on their ankles and have to go off into school quite stigmatized and get violated and picked up on this diversionary practice. Same with drug treatment programs. Oh, it's a diversion. We're going to keep them out of secure detention and send them to drug treatment. Having spent a lot of time, and this is longer than this conversation, working with these drug treatment programs that work with kids. It's a cottage industry, not best practices in place, and education is out the window by and large. The focus is treatment, and the kids are getting Zippo. Here's a crossword puzzle. Good luck with that. So sure, measure all those things. I don't know how, I'll leave it to the social scientists to get at, but yes, all of the times that you're in any way, shape, or form removing that child from the family because of the JJ system or imposing restrictions, there's data to be collected and their impacts as a result.
It's good you're on this committee. We do appreciate your input.
Oh, no worries.
Very much so. I hope you will consider staying. So I'm going to leave all that good work to Maya to try to give us some data agenda points related to that on this document. And then perhaps, you'll get that email. Perhaps you'll review it and give us some pointers if we're headed in the same direction, if we're headed in the right direction. And I'll also be looking for others who might be able to contribute to that as well.
Dr. Houchen, someone else raised their hand. Christine Wegner raised her hand.
Hi, Christine.
Hi, sorry, I was waiting for like the public comment moment, and then I was like, I maybe that's not officially happening or whatever. So I just wanted to make sure it was okay. So I just want to say, first of all, like my opinion comes from just, I was kind of stepped away for a little while, and I'm just kind of coming back in and listening in on the trust meetings and the technical advisory committee, and so based on what I understand the technical advisory committee is, I just wanted to say that I really like the idea of including a lot of the, wait, what did we call them? Data agenda, sorry, yeah. Because I think that we really shouldn't shy away from indicators because we're not sure how to capture the data. Because one, I think that I think that was the reason, right, for the needs assessment, right, is to pay somebody $300,000 to go out and find these things. So, and then also maybe some of these things we can't capture on an individual level, but some of these things we might be able to capture on a system-wide level. So, for example, and this was kind of my other smaller comment, was that the first one, which is on health, right? So, Deidre and I, we did work together on this, on the out of school time document that was disseminated to the Children's Trust, and it talked about how out of school time providers a lot of them are using this PYD framework, but not a lot of them are talking about identity, cultural identity, gender identity, both of which we talked about here. And so, something like that, when we think about health, identity development, super important, as far as mental health goes. And just because we don't necessarily know how, or, know that maybe we can measure on an individual level, if it's something that we think that should be important to the trust, then we should, one, offer the opportunity to find a way to measure it. And then two, there are sort of roundabout ways we can measure some things on a systematic level, right? So if we find, if we can come out and say, we know that this is really important, and we see that these programs that there aren't programs and there aren't things happening in the schools that are addressing these things, then well, that's where the trust should focus its money or its resources or whatever, or look for ways to measure that. So I think for me, as I saw like the kind of the point of the technical advisory committee was that, we want to say, this is what, what should be, right? I know like kind of a wish list, I get it, but I think it's better to be more encompassing than less encompassing when we think about what is it that we want to know, and kind of, offer the ability of some kind of proposal to come out to say, hey, maybe there is a way to measure it, maybe there's not, or maybe this is the best we could do, but this is what we really want to know about the youth in our community. I don't know, just my 2 cents.
I have a question. Oh, I'm sorry.
Please go, Colin. I was about to try to wrap us up.
No, go ahead. Unimportant. Everyone else is important.
Well,
Go
wait,
ahead.
I have a question though, before we get off. I do want to make sure that Deidre is also going to be sending her notes on anything related to these indicators, and not just expecting Maya and myself to pull this all together, because we are not content experts here, and there's some nuance in the discussion that we're not likely to have caught. And if we're only going to do this based on our review of the recorded session and then notes that we've taken, I think that we will miss important points without getting some notes from this, from you, Deidre, and calling the meeting as a content expert.
Here's what I'd ask. Colin, can you send me a copy of the recorded meeting so I can make notes? Because I said I was going to take them and didn't. So right now, what I'd like to do is copy and paste all that's in the chat in a document, which I'm doing. And then if I get a copy of the recorded meeting, I'll make pretty comprehensive notes within the next week to send you, Dr. Knopf. I'm happy to do that. I hear you. And certainly wouldn't want to put the burden on y'all, as well as the nuance.
Dr. Haushin, as soon as the meeting's done, Zoom does whatever Zoom does and creates a link to the recorded meeting, which I'll be happy to send out to everybody. And it also records the chat. So I
Oh,
can
great.
yeah, and send it to everybody. That's one of the benefits of using this.
Okay. Well, here's what we did not get to. We didn't get to learning, which to me, there's a lot of PYD indicators that fall under learning. And we did not review this definition on all children live in a safe community. And I have some concern that it begins with trauma and doesn't define what a safe community is. So I'm happy to make my notes on that and send them. But I would urge anybody on this call, particularly with experience and knowledge with youth, to also add any sources of data and fine tune these things so that at the next meeting, we have as much expertise as possible so that we're able to really, really support the youth in this community in a complex and diverse way.
Right, and also related to safe communities, remember that we've talked extensively at the past 2 meetings about bringing in indicators and information from the Social Vulnerability Index as a measure of community. And so that those may or may not be in the spreadsheet, but they're included in all of the additional documentation that Colin sent out to us over the past couple weeks.
Okay, that's great. As soon as there is, and I don't mean to put any haste on it, I know y'all are working, you're volunteering and you're working a lot, but if there is a way, I'd love to have the most up-to-date document that includes the data agenda, the safe and vulnerable communities, and the indicators that I've already added to it to work from. That would be super helpful for me so I'm not duplicating work.
Yeah,
We'll do our best.
Got it. I hear you. I hear you. Thank you, everybody. From my end, I suppose Colin, do I need to do something official to adjourn the meeting, or is that somebody else's role?
I would just make sure that all of the public is at an opportunity to comment. So maybe call one more time for public comment. And then if not, you can go ahead and just adjourn the meeting.
Public comment? Do we have anybody else who'd like to speak?
This is Sherry Kitchens. I just wanted to tell you all how much I appreciate how much time that you're putting into this and the depth at which you're looking. I think it only will improve our outcomes, the information we're really seeking. So thank you all.
Thank you. Okay, so do I need to move for the meeting to be adjourned or just adjourn it?
I think you can go ahead and just adjourn it.
All right, I adjourn the meeting. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.